Ridley Scott's Napoleon is everything wrong with biopics. It is, for me personally, the most disappointing movie of the year, and extensive historical distortion aside, is an absolutely dreadful movie in its own right. There is no way I am going to call this a historical mess by the name Ridley Scott has slapped on it, Napoleon. This cataclysmic disappointment does not deserve to bear the royal title of the Emperor of the French Empire. I will be referring to this movie as Ridley Scott's Napoleon, or RSN for short. This will also ensure no confusion between the great man himself and the cinematic defilement that appropriates his name. I will begin this review by going through all the major historical inaccuracies in the movie, because if I stop to correct a historical mistake every time we come across one in this video, I will be constantly interrupting the flow of my own script, and the video will be a mess. To begin, let's examine Ridley Scott's response to critics of his movie's historical inaccuracy. He said, quote,
"Get a life."
This is an absolutely disgraceful dismissal of valid criticism. RSN is not historical fiction like Braveheart, Apocalypto, or Gladiator, nor is it historical fantasy like 300 or The Northman. If this was the case, artistic license would be expansive, historical accuracy would be relatively unimportant, and critics could be dismissed as pedantic busybodies, though this would not invalidate their criticisms. But Ridley Scott's Napoleon has not been advertised as either historical fiction or fantasy. It has been advertised and marketed as an accurate adaptation of the abridged version of Napoleon's Wikipedia page, and the name Scott has given his movie, Napoleon, is a declaration that what is being presented is a faithful attempt to bring Napoleon Bonaparte to life on screen. I would not have any problem with the historical inaccuracies in RSN if it was openly fictitious and called Of Cuckolds and Harlots.
Your Majesty, your wife has taken a lover. Good.
Accuracy in historical drama matters. It is impossible for a historical film to be 100% accurate, and that is not the goal of historical film. The goal is for the people, events, and period presented on screen to be rendered as accurately as possible. That is, in large part, what makes it compelling. Audiences are attracted to historical drama because it is a lens through which we can visually imagine and, if done brilliantly, such as in Sergei Bondarchuk's Waterloo, to glimpse the past. Just because 100% accuracy is not possible, the filmmaker does not then have license to assert that fidelity to reality of past events is entirely irrelevant. Sir Ridley, if you want to make fiction, do it. Go make Gladiator 2 Commodus's Revenge. If you want to make a fictional movie inspired by reality, do that. Amadeus is the story of Cain and Abel told within the framework of a fictionalization of Mozart's life and is arguably the greatest movie ever made. Or make a movie which endeavors to bring history to life on the big screen accurately, faithfully, and with respect for the realities of history. Der Untergang did this with its portrayal of Adolf Hitler and the dying days of the Third Reich. Steven Spielberg did it with Lincoln, one of the best portrayals of a historical figure yet rendered in film. But RSN does not fall into any of these categories. It isn't fiction since it's based on real people and events. It isn't historical fiction as it claims to be a retelling of the highlights of Napoleon's life, and in any case it makes no sense as historical fiction since it doesn't contain an identifiable story. The movie is just a series of scenes purporting to be events and incidents that occurred in Napoleon's life stuck together with no context or thematic framing, and it isn't a historical drama since Ridley Scott makes next to no effort to ensure historical integrity, something which he clearly believes is beneath him, judging from his comment that those who criticize the atrocious historical ineptitude of this movie need to get a life. As best I can tell, RSN is just an excuse for badly executed battle scenes in between long, boring, fictitious melodrama between Napoleon and Josephine. The movie has no legitimate reason for being. It's not even political propaganda. At least Netflix's Afro Queen had the decency to openly admit that it was shameless, historical distortionist, agenda-driven trash intended for use as a weapon in the contemporary culture war.
She was an African queen, and that's a fact that's been buried, erased, whitewashed.
But Ridley Scott's Napoleon is just historical distortionism at its laziest. Why does Napoleon slap Josephine during their divorce signing despite the fact that this never happened? Because it's dramatic and makes an otherwise boring scene more compelling. Why did the French nuke the Pyramid of Giza at the Battle of the Pyramids despite the fact that a 12-pound cannon at maximum elevation could not hit anywhere near the top of the pyramid, and the pyramids were 17 kilometers away from the battle? Because it looks cool. Why is the English position Little Gibraltar depicted as a medieval castle at the siege of Toulon when it was in fact a fortified hill? Because it looks cool. Why did Napoleon turn into a giant bat that looks like Jared Leto, then flies into the sky at Borodino, declares,
"It's Napoleon in time,"
then lead his army in smashing the Russian formations? Because having Napoleon morb all over the Russian lines on horseback is just a lot easier than rendering the much more interesting, though admittedly less morbish, reality of having him direct the battle from afar, the dramatic tension reaching a crescendo while he considers his generals' pleas to commit the elite Imperial Guard at a critical moment in the battle when sending them in might well have split the Russian army in two and achieved a major victory. Spoiler alert, Napoleon did not commit the guard, and the Russians were able to withdraw in good order. Why did a World War I sniper with a scope travel back in time to offer to shoot Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo? Because it looks cool. Why did 24-year-old Napoleon disguise himself as a 49-year-old peasant to scope out the British defences at Toulon? Because it looks cool. Why did he remain in that disguise for the rest of the movie? Shut the fuck up. Why did Milo from Morbius show up at the Treaty of Tilsit and start dancing? Because
it's Morbin time.
And at the Battle of Endor, when Napoleon gave his famous orders,
I said closer, move as close as you can, and engage those Star Destroyers at point-blank range,
which led to the destruction of the Super Star Destroyer, why did Cleopatra turn to the space rowers and start shouting, "Row, you Legion horse, row!" Because
Cleopatra was black.
Reflection of myself.
Ridley Scott distorted history for the sake of cheap, throwaway popcorn spectacle. Then he flashed a sanctimonious tribute to the people who died during the Napoleonic Wars as an end screen. He was unwilling to accurately portray the world these men fought and died in, more interested in using their civilization as a prop for a flashy war movie and cringy soap opera romance, and the greatest man of their time as a mannequin designed to defame that man.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
To present him as a simpish weakling who is more interested in practicing rearguard flanking maneuvers with Josephine than in coherent negotiations with the English.
Boats!
Ridley Scott disrespects the men of the Napoleonic era in this way, yet feels righteous in offering a hollow, fake tribute to them. That is shameful and hypocritical. If Ridley Scott truly wanted to offer a tribute to the fallen soldiers of the Napoleonic Wars, he would have made a film that at least tried to offer a true rendering of their world, explained their reasons for fighting, and showed their bravery, genius, honor, and humanity. Instead of this.
Boats!
Historical integrity matters. The first major historical inaccuracy that jumps out from the screen like a vampire rushing at his target is that Napoleon was not a middle-aged man when he won his first victory. He was 24 years old. Scott deliberately avoids ever mentioning Napoleon's age because if he did, this would happen.
I've quadrupled the size of our artillery.
Oh,
He's 24.
Joaquin Phoenix should never have been cast in this role. He is far too old to play a young Napoleon, but it could be worse. Ridley Scott could have made a movie about the 29-year-old Mediterranean Hannibal crossing the Alps and cast a 68-year-old black man to play Hannibal. Good thing Netflix didn't do that. And let's just be thankful RSN wasn't a Netflix production. One of the most spectacular aspects of Napoleon's life was the greatness of his achievements at such a young age. At 24, he defeated the Allies at Toulon and achieved the rank of Brigadier General. Prior to this, he was already the main breadwinner for his mother and 7 siblings, as his artillery officer's salary was their only means of income. Being promoted to general was essential not just to Napoleon, but to the entire family, as it allowed them to escape from poverty. Fuck man, when I was 24, I was broke, living in a rundown apartment in Lyon, failing to find secure work, drinking my part-time job income away, and chasing women with very modest success. Good times, man. I did learn French, though. Je ne le parle pas couramment, mais assez bien pour dire que j'espère que cette espèce de merde film brûle dans le caverne le plus profond d'enfer. On the 5th of December 1797, Napoleon marched triumphantly into Paris after his victorious Italian campaign and presented the French government with the Treaty of Campo Formio, which Napoleon had negotiated himself with the Austrians. The treaty awarded France significant territorial gains and brought an end to the War of the First Coalition. Napoleon was 28. At age 30, he became first consul of France, and at 35, he crowned himself emperor. This is one achievement I did manage to best Napoleon in, as I first declared myself a despot at the age of 33. By casting a man well into middle age to play Napoleon, Ridley Scott robs his movie of one of the most magnificent and compelling aspects of the Napoleonic epic: the brilliant young man, the impatient, frenetic, and infectious energy that emanates from great young men charging towards success. The Beatles had this, Conor McGregor had it in the mid-2010s. People love this energy. It's exciting. It speaks to the endless potential of youth and the greatness of positive male ambition. Casting Joaquin Phoenix to play Napoleon is like casting a group of doughy men in their mid-40s to play the Beatles. It was a disastrous decision, and it doomed this movie from the start. It also spits in the face of the popular imagination. When people who have studied Napoleon's life imagine the Siege of Toulon, they think of this.
Any retired artillerymen within 80 miles? The timement's over!
Not this.
I'm in Toulon already. The troops are in a poor state.
A vaguely depressed looking, somewhat haggard, middle-aged man with deep lines running through a face dominated by drooping eyelids that have too long suffered the ravages of gravity, the glow of youth long since dissipated. Josephine was 6 years older than Napoleon, but Napoleon was so enamored of her that he didn't care about the age difference or the fact that she already had 2 children by another man. This is a vital aspect of the Napoleon and Josephine relationship dynamic, but Ridley Scott cannot even mention this in the movie because he cast a near 50-year-old to play Napoleon, and it would be farcical to suggest that Joaquin Phoenix, who looks like this, is 6 years younger than Vanessa Kirby, who looks like this. By the way, at the time Napoleon and Josephine married, it had actually become common to see young men married to older women, often much older women, in a hilarious example of the law of unintended consequences. In 1793, the French government, the National Convention, introduced the Levée en masse, a national conscription that compelled all able-bodied, unmarried men between the ages of 18 and 25 to enlist and fight for la révolution et la patrie on the bloody frontiers of the war. This resulted in a sudden, massive boom in young men getting married. Women of marriageable age very quickly became either unavailable or far too sought after, and many young men had to marry old women to avoid getting conscripted. I recall reading about a father defending the marriage of his 17-year-old son to a 55-year-old widow by saying,
"She's not complete trash yet. She can still cook and clean."
Napoleon abolished the marriage exemption when he took power. By having a middle-aged man play Napoleon, RASN loses the essential element of contrast. Here is a painting of Napoleon during his Italian campaign when he was 26 years old. Youthful, sharp features, the flowing hair of a style-conscious young man. He's lean, fit, and sprightly. Here is a painting of Napoleon at Fontainebleau at the age of 45. He's balding, tired-looking, overweight with a fat gut, and his face is soft and rounded. Okay, so he's not 24 years old anymore, but there's no question the man has let himself go, growing overfond of food and comfort and indifferent to exercise. This contrast in health and appearance could be utilized in a movie to emphasize Napoleon's fall from greatness and as a visual indicator of the great span of time that has passed. In Love and Mercy, a biopic that portrays the life of Brian Wilson, the main creative force of the Beach Boys, Wilson is portrayed by 2 actors. A young Wilson is played by Paul Dano and a middle-aged Wilson by John Cusack. It works excellently within the structural framework of the movie. The first part depicts a young Brian Wilson at the height of his creative abilities while he was making Pet Sounds.
No, that was great. Okay, let's do it again.
The second depicts a middle-aged Wilson under the tyranny of an abusive parasite claiming to be a personal doctor who has taken control of Wilson's life and finances, played brilliantly by Paul Giamatti.
No!
You are not goddamn hungry. You think you're hungry. Do you understand the goddamn difference? Wait your turn. You have got to be kidding me.
Using two actors also avoids the horror that is aging prosthetics. The two actors, each portraying a specific period in the protagonist's life, also introduced an innovative approach in a genre that had grown stale. The rise, fall, and redemption arc had become a paint-by-numbers cliche in biopics and was used in Walk the Line, Ali, and Ray, among much other now-forgotten Oscar-bait bilge. This dull-as-dishwater format was parodied in the 2007 movie Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story.
Give him a minute, son. Dewey Cox needs to think about his entire life before he plays.
And was later used unironically in the criminally underhated Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh, that's really good.
No, it isn't, Rami. It really, really isn't. Imagine a Napoleon movie in two parts. One, Captain Bonaparte at Toulon, eager to win glory and promotion, provide for his struggling family, and keep his head during the Terror, contrasted against Emperor Napoleon at the Battle of the Nations, the biggest battle in European history at that point, both periods of his life fully fleshed out. Ridley Scott could have used the two actors method, and in doing so, avoided repeating the exact same mistakes that led to Oliver Stone's calamitous 2004 military biopic, Alexander, a movie that was so bad that Oliver Stone himself later commented,
Alexander never lost a battle until I made the movie.
And fair play to Stone for eating his L. I doubt we'll see the same humble behaviour from the man who told critics of his trash movie to get a life. But hold on, what is this?
It's morbid time.
After the costly French victory at Borodino, which was far from decisive, the Russian army withdrew in good order and the French marched into Moscow. In RSN, Napoleon says Moscow is only 200 miles away.
Moscow is now only 200 miles away.
This is just wrong. Borodino is 70 miles from Moscow. These kinds of very basic mistakes expose just how pathetically inept the research that went into RSN was. Clearly, the script wasn't even proofread by a qualified Napoleonic historian. Another major problem with RSN is the time jumps. The jumps in time between scenes are often so massive and leave out so much that audiences will draw incorrect conclusions about the events depicted. For example, after Napoleon retreats from Russia, he is shown abdicating at Fontainebleau in the very next scene. This would lead the average viewer to conclude that Napoleon abdicated immediately after the Russian campaign, and that the campaign in Russia completely destroyed the French capacity to resist invasion, which is, of course, not true. Napoleon did lose Le Grand Armée in Russia, almost 600,000 men, and France's dominance as a continental power was shattered, but France was far from beaten. The war dragged on for 15 more months following the French retreat from Russia. During this time, the French fought over 20 battles. Napoleon was decisively defeated at the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of the Nations, a 4-day battle involving 560,000 men and 2,200 guns, and Napoleon would have re-established French dominance in Europe if he had won that battle. The Battle of the Nations did not feature, nor was mentioned in RSN. Following the defeat at Leipzig, Napoleon fought the campaign of France, which he described as
my most beautiful campaign.
Napoleon commanded brilliantly, winning 4 victories in a row in the 6 Days campaign, but his generals in other parts of the country were defeated and his own army was too small to stop the Allied advance on Paris. Here's a great little bit of Napoleonic history that would work wonderfully in a cinematic context. As Napoleon was retreating back to France after Leipzig, Karl Philipp von Reda of Bavaria, who had gone over to the Allies, tried to block Napoleon's retreat. After a brief examination of Reda's opening deployment, Napoleon remarked,
I made him a count, but I could not make him a general.
The heavily outnumbered Napoleon proceeded to smash Reda's army and completed his retreat to France. But we don't get any of that. Napoleon's at Moscow, then he heads down the road to Fontainebleau, says, well, I had a good run, signs his abdication, then joins the MCU to play Napoleon, the vampire general who wins battles by day
Load it again and run it out.
and morbs by night. Napoleon did not leave Egypt because he found out Josephine was cucking him. He left because his army was stranded in Cairo and Alexandria and no longer able to undertake aggressive action following their failed invasion of Syria, the destruction of the French fleet by Nelson, and the awful political and geopolitical situation that had developed in France while Napoleon was in Egypt. Napoleon did find out about Josephine's infidelity in Egypt, and true to form, he acted quickly and decisively to solve it by stealing one of his officers' wives and avenging himself upon her willing flesh. He also wrote to his brother Joseph, instructing him to make the necessary preparations for a divorce, but the letter was intercepted by Nelson and published in the London newspapers, and I'm not even sorry, I have to applaud the English for that. What a beautiful piece of spitefully hilarious psychological warfare. The French did not use ladders at the siege of Toulon. They blew up a section of the wall using gunpowder barrels, then stormed the English fort, which was a fortified hill, not a medieval castle. Napoleon was bayoneted in the leg by an English soldier at Toulon. This was not in the movie, probably because Scott realized that showing this wound would have compelled him to show Napoleon's recovery period, since a jump from a badly wounded Napoleon after Toulon to a fresh, fully recovered Napoleon in Paris would have been too jarring. Ridley Scott chose to omit the only serious battle wound Napoleon ever received for the sake of convenience. In RSN, the French start firing on the English ships in Toulon harbour immediately after taking Little Gibraltar. In reality, the French did not start firing on the English ships until the day after they had taken the fort, as Napoleon needed time to get his guns into position. The Battle of the Pyramids did not actually take place at the pyramids. The pyramids were 17 kilometers away from the battle, and no, the French cannons did not fire on the Pyramid of Giza. The Battle of Austerlitz is an absolute mess. The Austrians and Russians did not advance on the French across an open flat plain. They occupied a hill, then went downhill toward the French. Napoleon didn't use vague hand signals to issue orders. He issued written commands, which were carried across the battlefield by riders. This is a battle, not a baseball game. There were no World War I trenches, and cavalry did not ride through their own infantry. This would not have been possible anyway, since infantry advanced in formation with no large gaps, since such gaps could have been easily exploited by enemy infantry or cavalry. The battle centre was not fought over a tent city. There were frozen ponds at Austerlitz, but there was not a big frozen lake. The French did fire cannons at the retreating Russians, causing the ice to break. The Russians lost as many as 100 guns and 150 horses in the ponds, but almost no men. The ponds were drained a few days after the battle on Napoleon's orders, and the bodies of only 2 or 3 men were found. The Austerlitz battlefield was also much larger than is portrayed in RSN. The movie depicts the battlefield as a large, flat, open plain. In reality, the battlefield was 7 kilometers long, with 3 smaller separate battles forming part of the larger battle. The Pratzen Heights formed the centre. Heavy fighting also occurred in the area in and around the Santon Hill in the north and Telnitz in the south. Napoleon did not charge the Russians on horseback at Borodino. At no point in his career did Napoleon fight on horseback. He was trained as an artillery officer, not a cavalryman, and he was known to be a very bad rider. He only rode small horses because he did not have the skill to mount battle horses unassisted. Here is a brief extract from The Myth of Napoleon's Horse by Jill Hamilton, detailing his poor equestrian skills.
Napoleon held his reins loose, controlling the animal by shifts in his body weight. He sat slouched forward on his horse, his toes lower than his heels in the stirrups. Napoleon had a poor seat. He slid forward and back and from side to side as he rode, wearing holes in his breeches. In spite of this, he was an indefatigable rider, slapdash and reckless. He rode for pleasure as well as necessity. He took many spills from horses, which were covered up. Napoleon was knocked unconscious and nearly killed when he fell from an unfamiliar horse, hitting a tree, the week prior to the Brumaire coup.
Napoleon did not charge the English at the Battle of Waterloo, nor did he personally engage in the fighting there. In fact, he was sick at the Battle of Waterloo. At RSN Waterloo, the Prussians arrived on the French left flank. In the actual battle, the Prussians arrived on the French right. The English did not dig World War I trenches. There were no time-traveling World War I snipers, at least not that the historical record is aware of, and Napoleon was not aware of the Prussian arrival until very late in the battle. He initially thought that the Prussians were French reinforcements. Robespierre did not shoot himself after a fiery debate at the National Assembly. He shot himself following his arrest, escape, and apprehension. Napoleon was not present at Marie Antoinette's execution. He was on garrison duty in southern France at the time. Napoleon never bitched to the British ambassador that
you think you're so great because you have boats!
It's boatin' time.
Napoleon's mother did not acquire an 18-year-old girl to serve as a reproductive vessel upon and within which Napoleon would demonstrate his fecundity. Napoleon fathered 3 children, one of whom had been born by the time of the scene depicted in RSN. Only one of Napoleon's children was legitimate, the King of Rome, who sadly died of tuberculosis at the age of 21. Napoleon and Arthur Wellesley never met. And in the Battle of Waterloo, where was the part when Napoleon turned to Ney and said,
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy them!
English. Charge the cavalry into their squares without infantry support.
I'm sure there are plenty of other glaring historical distortions in the movie that I was not erudite enough to pick up on, but I think I have done enough to prove that RSN has no business calling itself a historical adaptation. It is a historical fiction masquerading as an adaptation. Andrew Roberts, author of the excellent Napoleon the Great, had the following to say regarding RSN's historical accuracy.
How much of the film is, in your terms, accurate?
Of the 2 hours, 38 minutes, I'd say 38 minutes.
By far, the most offensive historical distortion in RSN is the depiction of Napoleon himself. Ridley Scott's portrayal of Napoleon is nothing short of a disgrace. This is not an honest attempt at a portrayal of Napoleon Bonaparte. This is character assassination. The political and military genius that made himself the emperor of the most powerful nation in the world and conquered all of continental Europe is portrayed as a spoiled, developmentally arrested man-child. He is depicted variously as a wimp, a flighty cuck, an abusive husband, a socially inept imbecile, very briefly as a heroic general, a moron, a tyrant, an emotionally incontinent whinge.
How could you care so little for me and my feelings?
A victorious conqueror and a loving father. The movie absolutely cannot make up its mind about how it wants to portray Napoleon. Ridley Scott knows he hates Napoleon and clearly wants to spoil the popular image of him to the fullest extent possible.
You are a selfish little pig.
But he's also aware that he has to present the great conqueror in postures familiar to the historical image of Napoleon. He wants to shit on his Napoleonic cake.
Boats!
And eat it too. Joaquin Phoenix is atrocious. This is undoubtedly his worst performance. No charisma, no presence, no magnetism, no mojo, none of the characteristics or personality traits that caused several generations of men to follow Napoleon into battle, to hail him as their emperor, to join him on his march to Paris during the 100 days, to celebrate the birth of his son. Phoenix gives a flat, tired, erratic performance that captures none of the leadership, greatness, majesty, or intelligence of the real man. Here is just one of countless examples of how bad Phoenix is. Listen to his rendition of Napoleon's famous speech given at his coronation as emperor.
I found the crown of France in the gutter. I picked it up with the tip of my sword and cleaned it and placed it atop my own head.
Lifeless and flat, Phoenix sounds like he's bored out of his mind and half asleep delivering those lines. Joaquin Phoenix's Napoleon will go down as an infamous example of a great actor giving an awful performance. Down there with Keanu Reeves in Much Ado About Nothing.
I had rather be a canker in a hedge than a rose in his grace.
John Travolta as the alien guy in Battlefield Earth.
The home planet owns this planet.
A bizarre trashterpiece which is unironically better than RSN. Arnold Schwarzenegger in Batman and Robin.
You're not sending me to the cooler.
Actually, you know what? I'm not having that. That is an underrated performance, man. From this day forward, Arnold Schwarzenegger's performance as Mr. Freeze shall no longer be maligned. I, the despot, hereby decree that Arnie was fucking great in Batman and Robin and shall henceforth and forever be regarded as such.
Let's kick some ice.
Tom Hanks in Elvis.
Vixen and all the reindeer pulling on the rein. Elvis Presley's Wonderful World of Christmas. Brought to you by the Sigma Sewing Machine Company.
That is one of the most bizarrely awful performances I have ever seen, made even worse by the contrast against Austin Butler's magnificent performance as Elvis. If you have 5 minutes, go look at a few clips of Tom Hanks playing the Colonel in Elvis. It is horrendous and fascinating. Before I get on to the many non-history related negatives of RSN, I will mention a couple of positives. The best thing in this movie, by far, is Vanessa Kirby's breasts. They are wonderful, both of them, and she's well cast as Josephine. She does the best she can with the melodramatic, turgid shite that passes for the lines she is forced to speak.
I'm a flower that opens its petals and smiles to the sunshine.
In a better timeline, one in which Christopher Nolan was paid an ungodly sum of money by Warner to create an 8-season-long Napoleonic epic, Vanessa Kirby could have been a great Josephine. The production and costume design is also good, and the cinematography was reasonably solid. Rupert Everett is very good as Wellington, and Ian McNeice is an excellent Louis XVIII, though he's only in the movie very briefly. McNeice delivers the standout moment in the movie.
Your Majesty. You may speak.
Aside from historical distortion, the biggest problem with RSN is that it is structured in a greatest hits format. This could also be referred to as an abridged Wikipedia page format. This is when a biopic consists of the best known and most dramatic events and anecdotes from the subject's life, then ends on what the filmmakers imagine is the high point of the subject's life, or the subject's death. This format was used in the following movies: the now mercifully forgotten 2001 Will Smith movie Ali, which followed Muhammad Ali's career along ground well trodden by countless documentaries, before finishing on his KO of George Foreman. Ray, a 2004 biopic depicting the life of Ray Charles, for which Jamie Foxx won an Oscar.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it do what it do, baby. Yeah.
People still think this movie is good because no one has watched it in 20 years. Ray is not a good movie. If you disagree, I challenge you to watch it. You will break down in tears of boredom and give up long before you reach the finish line. No wonder Ray Charles never watched it. The abysmal Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom, starring Idris Elba. I think it would be best for everyone involved and everyone depicted if we just pretend that this...
I have cherished the ideal of a free society. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
Never happened. Alexander, a 2004 adaptation of the life of Alexander the Great by Oliver Stone. The movie was a massive box office bomb and critical failure. The famously terrible Jobs, starring Ashton Kutcher as Steve Jobs.
Everything is a pressing issue.
I already fired you!
A movie which lived on briefly as a meme and, following its short life, has become a minor cult trashterpiece. The Iron Lady, a 2011 whistle-stop tour of Margaret Thatcher's career, marriage and dementia, starring Meryl Streep, pictured here with her close friend and associate...
and God, Harvey Weinstein.
Bohemian Rhapsody. In a musical landscape where bands have become commercially extinct, the culture got drunk on the elixir of Queen nostalgia poured into eager, wide-open mouths by this movie. Drunk on this nostalgia, audiences had an ill-advised one-night stand with Bohemian Rhapsody the movie, resulting in the deformed bastard child that was Rami Malek's Oscar win for his over-the-top caricaturish portrayal of Freddie Mercury.
Let's dance. Yeah. It's my party and I demand you dance. We should go. By royal decree.
When everyone sobered up and realized that Bohemian Rhapsody was actually kind of shit, it was too late. The movie, pregnant with almost $1 billion in box office revenue, gave birth to the necromanced form of the cinematic demiurge that is the greatest hits format biopic. As a result, we have the following biopics to look forward to. Beautiful, which will be about Carole King, a 70s songwriter with one good album, which was a compilation of the best songs she had written for other artists over a period of years. Although in fairness to Carole King, that is one good album more than most musicians ever release. A Complete Unknown, which will feature Timothée Chalamet as a young Bob Dylan and is being directed by James Mangold, the director of Logan and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Barbaro's role as Bias is going to be pretty significant as she'll play Dylan's female folk counterpart, collaborator, and duet partner during his early career. Female counterpart, female counterpart, female counterpart, female counterpart.
Back to Black, an Amy Winehouse hagiography. Bob Marley, One Love. Ireland's own Bob Marley will be played by Kingsley Ben-Adir, who was in Secret Invasion, a show which I apparently watched the first 2 episodes of, according to my livestream history.
Bob, I know it's dangerous, but you're the only one who can unite the people.
And recently, Maestro, an end-of-year Oscar bait pick, dropped on Netflix, featuring Bradley Cooper as Leonard Bernstein. Hi, I'm Bradley Cooper, playing Leonard Bernstein. Give me an Oscar. And audience favourite Carey Mulligan.
Fuck you!
I went to see Maestro in the cinema yesterday, and after 1 hour and 30 minutes of watching Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan parading around on screen in many different outfits and under progressively increasing tonnages of aging prosthetics, screaming, "Give me an Oscar" at the camera, I got up and walked out of this absolutely pointless, vapid Hollywood vanity project. The greatest hits format is the socialism of biopics. It has failed every time it has been tried, but refuses to die. There's always a few directors around convinced that they can make it work this time. As soon as I saw the trailer for Ridley Scott's Napoleon, I knew the movie was going to suck because it was clear from the trailer that it was a greatest hits biopic. The greatest hits format does not and cannot work for several key reasons. Lack or complete absence of a coherent story, inability to properly contextualize events, false and erratic characterization. The biggest problem with the greatest hits structure relates to story. It is far too difficult to develop a single, coherent, identifiable story out of many years. In the case of RSN, decades of an individual's life. This is because life is not a single story, and normal life is a vast web of dozens, if not hundreds, of interlocking stories. Napoleon had one of the most storied lives in human history, and yet Ridley Scott's so-called epic contains not a single one. There are incomplete sketches that might have been good stories on their own given more time and fleshing out, and little bits and pieces of other stories, but all are incomplete and bastardized beyond recognition. The story Ridley Scott spends the most time on by far is Napoleon and Josephine. There is a forced, clumsy attempt to fabricate a narrative arc around Napoleon's relationship with Josephine, suggesting that many of Napoleon's major decisions in life were motivated by her. Napoleon leaves Egypt for Josephine. Napoleon escapes Elba to return to Josephine. He is predominantly fixated on his relationship with her to the detriment of his duties as emperor, none of which is true. And in any case, Josephine's arc is botched. Josephine de Beauharnais was a real character. She was a chronic shopaholic with absurd spending habits. Here is an extract from Empress Josephine by Ernest John Napton, detailing Josephine's spending.
Every wardrobe and chest at the Tuileries and Malmaison must have been crammed with Josephine's clothing. An inventory of 1809 shows 673 dresses of velvet or satin, 33 dresses of cashmere, and 202 dresses for the summer. She had acquired 520 pairs of shoes in that year, with 265 pairs carried over from the year before. The list includes 980 pairs of gloves, 252 hats, and 60 cashmere shawls. There are 158 pairs of white silk stockings, 32 of rose-colored and 18 flesh-colored pairs. There are 498 chemises and 2 pairs of flesh-colored pantaloons for riding. It was impossible for her to see a tradesman without buying something from him, and on such occasions prices were rarely mentioned.
She also had a very strong personality. Listen to this extract from The Life of Napoleon by Historically Adequate, whose channel is linked in the description.
Since her husband's return to Paris had been so abrupt, Josephine was residing in a new home she'd purchased at Malmaison, an idyllic little chateau just outside of Paris, nestled in pristine woodland. For 2 days, the couple did not reunite. Napoleon took visitors at his place on La Victoire until arrangements could be made for Josephine to return from Malmaison. On her way back into town, Napoleon went out to see her, and after some kerfuffle, the couple were reunited. It was not a happy reunion. What followed was a very heated domestic played out on the roadside for all to see. Josephine was clearly caught off guard, and in the ensuing hail of mutual denunciations and expletives, she came away worse for wear. In a huff, she retired to Malmaison, her bags packed.
Napoleon and Josephine getting laid into one another in public would have been a far more compelling scene than what was presented in RSN, in which Napoleon begs to be reassured of his importance, like a toddler begging for affection from his mommy.
I want you to say that I am the most important thing in the world.
Fucking pathetic. This is just one example of how the fiction presented by Ridley Scott is far less interesting than the reality of history. There is no chemistry between Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby, which makes the ham-fisted romance and sex scenes feel creepy and unintentionally funny, and at no point will the viewer seriously believe that Josephine and Napoleon are in love. Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby truly are an absolutely dreadful screen couple. Here is a great quote and military maxim from a historical figure admired by Napoleon, Frederick the Great.
He who defends everything defends nothing.
And he who portrays every major event in Napoleon's life, at least the ones that can be crammed into a 2.5-hour movie, portrays nothing. And while my transposition of the Frederick the Great maxim lacks the poetry of the original, it is no less true. One of the best adaptations of Napoleon's life I have seen is a 1-hour film from a very obscure 2007 BBC drama series called Heroes and Villains. Each episode of the series is an hour long and focused on a different historical figure. Each episode had a different creative team behind it, and they varied wildly in quality. The worst being a hilariously bungled Spartacus adaptation featuring a laughably bad casting choice for Spartacus.
Kill him!
Oh, you're lucky now. Welcome to hell.
That is freedom!
The casting and acting in that episode makes Rings of Power look like Pulp Fiction. But the Napoleon episode was excellent and is the highest rated on IMDb with a score of 8. It's historically very accurate. It focuses on Napoleon's role as an artillery commander during his first victory, the Siege of Toulon. It begins with Napoleon's arrival in Toulon to take control of the artillery and ends with the French victory. Napoleon has to not only devise a means of defeating the British, but navigate his way through the dangerous Byzantine political landscape of revolutionary France at the height of the terror. His mother is also a major figure in his life at this time, and she pressures him to succeed so that the family can escape poverty. There's also a subplot about an affair between a local political figure who is making life difficult for Napoleon and Napoleon's younger sister. Heroes and Villains Napoleon zones in on one extremely important period of Napoleon's life, a period that lasts only 4 months as opposed to the near 25-year span of RSN. This allows the film to contextualize the events that are being depicted, flesh out the characters and their relationships, and establish a clear dramatic arc with a beginning, middle, and end. There is far more story, characterization, and contextualization of events in this 1-hour TV film than there is in RSN's more than 2.5-hour runtime. Another huge problem that the greatest hits format causes is erratic or unrealistic characterization. The reality is that people change a lot over long periods of time. If you were to get into a DeLorean and travel back in time 15 years and have a conversation with your younger self, you would probably be astonished at just how different you were 15 years ago. This is particularly true for anyone under the age of 40. In Bohemian Rhapsody, Rami Malek portrays Freddie Mercury over a 15-year period from 1970 to 1985, and throughout the film, his portrayal of Mercury never gets beyond the socially awkward, shy, lovesick, damaged boy cliché.
Mary knows me in a way that no one else ever will.
Female counterpart.
Compare Malick's two-dimensional caricature to the reality of Freddie Mercury in this 1984 interview, during which he is, appropriately enough, talking about the process of maturing over time.
What emotions do you have when you see old stuff, for example?
Well, when I see myself, I want to tear them all up. I just think, I actually laugh at myself. But I know that it was something that you have to do. I don't regret any of the things I did. It's just that I laugh. I mean, what did you look like 10 years ago? And it's a process of growing up, you know, it's experience. And at this point in time, I think if I had long hair and fingernails and wearing the things, I would look ridiculous. I mean, I looked ridiculous then, but it worked. But it was all right then.
In the interview, Freddie Mercury is brimming with confidence, charm, and demonstrates a relaxed social intelligence, none of which is present in Malick's awkward performance. Malick's Mercury is withdrawn, unsure of himself, and lacking in basic social skills. He completely fails to portray Freddie Mercury's maturation over time. For an example of an actor that does portray personality development successfully, have a look at Austin Butler's performance as Elvis in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis.
You're great, Colonel. You are the best person I could ever hope to work with.
I'm sorry, Miss Jackson. The Colonel, he won't allow it.
Austin Butler changes his body language, mannerisms, and even his voice. Listen to his voice as a young Elvis.
Mama, I'm just trying to take care of you and Daddy. That's all I've ever cared about.
And now as a middle-aged Elvis trapped in Vegas.
Daddy, I've been playing this mausoleum for 100 years. How could we be broke?
Elvis is a rare example of a biopic that captures a personality transformation of a man across time. Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Napoleon is all over the place. He is, at various times, stoic and reserved. Other times he is emotionally incontinent. Boats! And at others he tries and fails to look inspiring. Sometimes his Napoleon is downright abusive and borderline insane.
If you do not bear me a child tonight, there will be a divorce.
But most of the time he just looks bored and vaguely lost. Apart from the fact that Joaquin Phoenix and Ridley Scott have failed utterly to capture the historic personality that was Napoleon, this is just bad acting. Joaquin Phoenix is an excellent actor and is clearly trying to act out Napoleon's personality development over time, but he obviously has no idea who Napoleon was at these various periods in his life. And when this combines with Ridley Scott's seemingly die-hard determination to character assassinate Napoleon, boats! The result is an absolutely disastrous mess. Joaquin Phoenix's Napoleon is easily the worst Napoleon ever put to screen. Ridley Scott should have just focused on one period in Napoleon's life. This would of course have to be his later life because of Joaquin Phoenix's age. For example, his invasion of Russia, or the Battle of the Nations with the movie finishing on Napoleon smashing Rita's army, or the Campaign of France, the movie finishing with his abdication. This would include a wonderful scene when, while marching to Paris to aid in the city's defense, Napoleon, hearing that his brother Joseph had surrendered the city, starts stamping back and forth, cursing the quote,
"Coward and Joseph."
Or the movie could be in non-chronological order, begin with Napoleon walking through the horrifying slaughter of the battlefield of Eylau, then go back a few months earlier to his affair with the Polish noblewoman Mary Walewska, then the lead up to Eylau, the battle itself, and the climax of the movie is Napoleon's victory over the Russians at Friedland. Any one of these options would have allowed Joaquin Phoenix to research and focus his portrayal of Napoleon on a single period of the man's life, instead of the capricious, schizophrenic, bungled shambles that we see in RSN. In the BBC film, Napoleon is played excellently by Tom Burke. Burke is a somewhat known British actor. He played Dolokhov in the 2016 BBC adaptation of War and Peace, which, while certainly not great, was a hell of a lot better than RSN, and Tom Burke is excellent as Dolokhov.
Hey, to the health of beautiful women, Petrushka, and their lovers.
When Napoleon is introduced, we see him through the eyes of his family. He is with several of his brothers and sisters and his mother, his father having died 8 years prior. His sister worries about him going to war.
War's not in a shop.
And his mother makes it clear to him that the family is depending on him. He is the man who has to support them all. He must succeed.
Everyone's going to get their chance, Napoleon. That's why we came to this country. You must make your name here. For all of us.
Immediately, the film is building characterization, context, and stakes. Napoleon is not the abstract historical figure presented in RSN, who fights big battles in vague locations and occasionally fucks Josephine. He is a brother, a son, the head of a struggling family of refugees from Corsica he needs desperately to provide for. If he fails or is killed or crippled in battle, he condemns his family to poverty. Because of this, the viewer is rooting for Napoleon very early on and is emotionally invested in his story. As absent as characterization is in RSN, the most glaring absence is characters. Ridley Scott's Napoleon is 2 hours and 37 minutes long and has 2 characters in it. The main character is Josephine. The movie dedicates vast amounts of time to her that should have been used for battle sequences or to communicate the political landscape Napoleon was dealing with. The second lead is the pathetic, wimpy figure we are meant to believe is Napoleon. Boats! There is no Ney, no Joseph Bonaparte, none of Napoleon's marshals, none of his many mistresses with whom he had affairs, no prime ministers or consuls or presidents or Morbius or von Metternich or the Pope or Le Code Napoleon. Marie-Louise, Napoleon's second wife, appears for literally seconds. His mother appears very briefly in 2 scenes, and Robespierre shows up for about a minute for no other reason than to shoot himself for the camera. Perhaps most bizarrely, Eugène, Josephine's only son and Napoleon's adopted son, only appears briefly as a child. Eugène was a very good general in his own right, viceroy of Italy, an astute politician and a very capable leader, and served brilliantly under Napoleon. You would think, given the huge amount of time the movie spends on Josephine, that she might be seen inquiring after her only son as he is risking his life for France in battle, or perhaps playing matchmaker to find a wife for him among the royal princesses of Europe. But no, nothing. There are no secondary characters in RSN. There are only human-shaped pieces of furniture in the background. Napoleon's mother, for example, just shows up twice briefly because the script requires her presence. Wellington is played quite well by Rupert Everett, but he only appears briefly and doesn't get any real characterization. As fine a job as Everett does, there's just not enough there for him to create a fully fleshed out on-screen character. He just barks out a few famous lines at Waterloo, then has a conversation with Napoleon. This conversation never happened, but Wellington had it anyway, so Ridley Scott could do an info dump. Take a look at this scene from Sergei Bondarchuk's excellent 1970 adaptation of The Battle of Waterloo, in which Wellington, played superbly by Christopher Plummer, discusses his soldiers with his wife.
They're the salt of England, Arthur.
Scum. Nothing but beggars and scoundrels. All of them. Gin is the spirit of their patriotism.
Yet you expect them to die for you?
Mm-hmm.
Out of duty?
Mm-hmm.
That is characterization. Wellington is so confident of his soldiers' obeisance that he doesn't even bother arguing the point when challenged on it. The topic is so settled in his mind that it doesn't even warrant verbal discussion. On the question of whether or not his men will follow his orders in the face of death while engaged in battle against the greatest and most dangerous military genius of the age, Wellington simply responds,
Mm-hmm.
Fucking based.
It's Wellington and time.
But RSN is in such a hurry to pack as many big Napoleonic events onto the screen as possible, that is, when the movie's not boring us to death with Josephine, that quieter, reflective, character-building scenes, such as the one we get in Bondarchuk's masterpiece between Wellington and his wife, are reserved solely for the movie's 2 characters, the cuckold and the harlot. The result is that we cannot invest emotionally in Napoleon's grand exploits. Yes, that battle looks very big and superficially impressive, but who is the French emperor facing here? Who are his opponents? What political faction or ideology does that opponent represent? Bondarchuk's Wellington very clearly represents the brutally aristocratic, old guard royalist ideology that characterizes an England in which social mobility is next to non-existent. The same ossified order of the Ancien Regime that will struggle to reimpose reimpose itself on a beaten France under the direction of the coalition's puppet, Louis XVIII, following Napoleon's final defeat. Scott also fails to contextualize the sudden appearance of a black French soldier telling a member of the Directory to resign during the Brumaire coup. Many viewers assumed that this was Thomas Alexandre Dumas, a French general and mixed-race Creole who served with Napoleon in Italy and Egypt, a campaign in which he commanded the French cavalry and distinguished himself. In fact, Dumas was in prison in Naples during the Brumaire coup, as his ship had run aground there on his return to France from Egypt. However, there were a few hundred black soldiers serving in the French army at the time, mostly mixed-race Creoles, many of whom had served in the Black Legion, officially known as La Légion Franche des Américains et du Midi, which was formed in 1792 and initially composed entirely of black soldiers. It isn't inaccurate to have a black soldier here, but none of this is explained or even mentioned. Once again, Scott simply hasn't bothered to offer any context for an aspect of his movie that requires it, and he could have done this very easily and within the context of a compelling scene. During the French conquest of Alexandria, Dumas led the French assault on the city walls. After the battle, Napoleon sent him to pay local Bedouins ransom for captured French soldiers. A scene in which Napoleon congratulates Dumas on the victory at Alexandria and explains to him his mission to recover kidnapped French soldiers would have been far more compelling than any one of the sleep-inducing, dreary, ass-dragging exercises in human endurance that were the Napoleon-Josephine scenes. But of course, we can't have two conquering generals have a discussion that doesn't evolve around Napoleon's
female counterpart.
Because this is current year. And in current year, the only thing that concerned the French emperor, who fought more than 80 battles over the course of 10 wars and ruled France for 15 years, was
Dear Josephine.
And why have a historically accurate scene featuring an interesting historical figure when you can have Napoleon throwing food at Josephine during a public dinner instead? Rather than communicate ethnographic context by presenting scenes which are interesting, dramatic, and rich in history, Scott just tosses a random black guy into someone's dining room and calls it a day. There you go, eligible for awards now. Don't worry though, Sir Ridley, I have no doubt that Napoleon will clean up at the Razzies. Joaquin Phoenix is probably favourite for worst actor, he and Vanessa Kirby will almost certainly win worst screen combo, and RSN has earned a worst movie nod, though I would hope it's beaten out by Nia DaCosta's The Marvels. And if Nia isn't nominated, I will personally start a Razzies So White campaign to ensure that talentless female creators of colour like Nia DaCosta get the recognition they so thoroughly deserve. The lack of characters, characterization, and context is all symptomatic of the diseased structure that is the greatest hits format. In the BBC film, the focus is on a single period of Napoleon's life. It takes the time it needs to show how Napoleon was living at that time, what his major concerns were, what he was like as a person, who the major figures in his life were, and depicts the socio-political landscape he was operating in.
Politics starts battles, doesn't win them. Give me back the artillery with a proper soldier in charge, not some periwinkle, even one from the old regime.
RSN also has a Toulon section. A middle-aged 24-year-old Napoleon shows up to Toulon's city walls disguised as a peasant because apparently Napoleon didn't know there's such a thing as military intelligence or that detailed maps existed at the time. Then we get the Battle of Toulon itself, during which Napoleon wasn't wounded because he didn't want to inconvenience Ridley Scott when Scott made a movie featuring the event 225 years later. The BBC Napoleon places a great deal of importance on context. Take a look at the opening scene.
It'll soon be over. And then tomorrow, after a good rest, I shall kill your wife.
Immediate communication of the political environment of France at the time of the Toulon siege. This is extremely important because Napoleon is trying to carry out a successful siege of an occupied French city. The recapture of Toulon is one of the main political imperatives of the French revolutionary government, the Directory, at this time. The result is constant political interference with the operation, which Napoleon has to deal with in such a way that does not endanger him politically or mortally in the midst of the terror. This proves an extremely difficult task. Here's a hilarious scene which shows Napoleon's disgust with the new general, a former dentist and political appointee with no military experience.
General Doppel, can I ask you what your plans are for Toulon?
And we will bring our enemy to justice, and justice to our enemy. You won't know, by the way, that I've changed my name. Periwinkle. The revolutionary calendar.
And the political hack sent to the area to enforce the terror, Stanislas Freron, threatens Napoleon with execution.
I've not killed anyone until a year ago. I was a journalist. You will be dead by nightfall.
Paris know about this ultimatum.
Stanislas is the physical manifestation of the terror in the film. He's a wonderful villain, played brilliantly by Rob Brydon.
I suggest your wife shuts her mouth and you tell us exactly how you plan to get the English out.
He first appears to Napoleon walking between two severed halves of a rabbit hanging from the ceiling, symbolising his role as the butcher of the guillotine. A very clever little visual metaphor. When making Goodfellas, Martin Scorsese said that he wanted the wise guy, gangster lifestyle to be a character in the movie. Here's a great example of this.
Good. What's up? There you go. How you doing, Gino? Hey, how are you? Good. Every time I come here, every time you two. Hey, how are you?
Hey, well, Henry, nice to see you.
Yeah, good seeing you.
Hi, how are you? Anthony, right in the front.
Great, thanks.
Anything you need, Henry, just let me know.
I appreciate it, thanks. Hey, how are you guys doing? How are you? See you. Hey, Henry, how are you?
The main character in this famous scene isn't Henry, it's the lifestyle, skipping the queue at fashionable restaurants, knowing many of the people who work there, a casual reference to Henry's black market activities, everyone fawning over him to get on his good side, being acknowledged by the wealthy and self-important, expensive clothes, the best table, the best food, the best drink, never having to wait for anything, living life at a non-stop frenetic pace in the midst of a constantly rotating cast of faces, names, acquaintances and women, being the main character when you walk into a room. In the BBC Napoleon, the terror isn't just an event that is happening somewhere else while Napoleon morbs all over the English at Toulon. It's a character in the film.
Is it true you led the executions in Marseille?
Have you ever seen one?
Last public holiday there, families were seen having their children baptized.
You know.
Throughout the runtime, the terror is a constant, oppressive presence hanging in the air that could strike at any moment. In RSN, the terror is just a brief political event that happens at the start of the movie. Regarding broader context, there is no coalition, very little in the way of politics, no Byzantine environment that Napoleon has to navigate through on his way to ultimate power, first as consul, then as emperor. There is absolutely no political, geopolitical, social, or even historical context to anything that is happening. Look at the Battle of Austerlitz as an example of this. Who is Napoleon fighting in the big snow battle? The Russians, the Prussians, the Austrians, the Empire from Star Wars? Where is he? Is this France, Germany, Russia, Hoth? When is this? Is this 1800, 1810, 3 ABY? Most importantly, why is he fighting? Is this a war of conquest? Defense? Does he have some limited political goal he wants to achieve? Is he hoping to cripple the Star Destroyer fleet? There is no answer to any of these questions. It's just empty spectacle, and not even good spectacle. There is in all the battles, but Austerlitz in particular, an overuse of CGI to render the many men and horses involved in the battle.
And then you've got the visual effects. It's because I never had more than 100 horses in the field. On those big days, I'd have 300 men. But what you see finally is 20,000 horses.
The whole battle is too dark and swamped in a fake-looking, murky fog to mask how shitty the CGI soldiers and horses look. RSN is a contextual void. The movie is filled not with history, substance, society, politics, characters, and intrigue, but with big chess pieces on a giant map, Vanessa Kirby's breasts, which, again, are fantastic.
All of them.
Napoleon going, the pyramids, horses, Morb, and, of course, boats! The battle scenes in RSN are another casualty of the greatest hits format. There are 6 major battles in the movie: the Siege of Toulon, Tres Vendémiaire, the Battle of the Pyramids, Austerlitz, Borodino, and Waterloo. Because Ridley Scott wants to pack so many battles into one movie, there isn't enough time to properly do any one battle, and most importantly, to tell the story of the battles. A battle is a story. Let's take Toulon as an example. The siege of Toulon was a several months long back and forth between the French and Allies, of whom the most formidable and dangerous were the English, though they only made up about a third of the Allied troops. In the BBC film, the battle is depicted accurately. The story of the battle, the shifting momentum between the French and the English around Toulon, the failed French attacks, the changes in French leadership, and the climactic attack to take Little Gibraltar. During this attack, Napoleon was commanding the reserve, and after seeing that the battle was going badly, decided to commit the reserve without orders. Here's how this is portrayed in the BBC film.
Going wrong. All 3 columns have turned in too early. We may have to commit the reserves.
Sir, but General de Gommier hasn't
They're floundering.
That one scene does more to communicate Napoleon's military genius than the entirety of RSN. He has the acumen to understand how the battle is going by listening to it, and the initiative, and the sheer balls to commit the reserve without orders. In RSN, all we get is a bored-looking Joaquin Phoenix making a lazy hand gesture. And shouted orders which are followed immediately.
Wait! Send in the infantry! Take their position on the higher ground! At the double! Infantry! Cavalry from the west! Pierce their flanks! Uncover the cannon! Cut off their retreat!
Which wasn't how orders were issued. It takes a gamer longer to perform a battlefield action in Napoleon Total War than it takes Napoleon to direct his army in RSN. Instead of a battle with a clear beginning, middle, and end, RSN presents bits and pieces of battles. Toulon consists of Napoleon being shot out from under his horse, then the French attack with ladders. This didn't happen, but I don't know. I guess they got inspired by watching the Battle of Helm's Deep. Then there's a little bit of night fighting, the end. Borodino, the biggest battle Napoleon fought in Russia, which resulted in around 80,000 total casualties, lasts 43 seconds. The Battle of the Pyramids lasts a grand total of 58 seconds and shows not a single casualty. This is just plain and simple, absolutely pathetic spectacle. And what does Napoleon say when we first see him in Egypt? Does he turn to his soldiers and say,
"I promise to each soldier who returns from this expedition enough to purchase 6 arpents of land"?
Perhaps we get a little bit of religious and cultural context in this scene. Napoleon standing in front of his troops and proclaiming,
"The peoples we will be living alongside are Muslims. Their first article of faith is, there is no other God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Do not contradict them. Treat them as you treated the Jews, the Italians. Respect their muftis and their imams, as you respected their rabbis and bishops."
Or maybe we first see the great general after his defeat of the barbaric Ottoman Mamelukes, dictating the following proclamation to a translator.
"For too long the beys who govern Egypt have insulted the French nation and covered their traders in slanders. The hour of their punishment has come. For too long this horde of slaves, bought in the Caucasus and Georgia, have tyrannized the most beautiful part of the world. But God, on whom all depends, has ordained that their empire shall end. People of Egypt, they have told you that I come to destroy your religion, but do not believe it. Tell them in reply that I come to restore your rights, punish the usurpers, and that I respect God, his prophet, and the Quran more than the Mamluks."
This could be a great scene for Napoleon's characterization in the movie, in which he is revealed as a religious pragmatist, perfectly happy to believe whatever is most politically useful to believe, similar to this excellent scene in Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus.
No. Keep the change and give it to your wife.
May the gods adore you.
Only through your prayers, Fimbria. Let's make an old-fashioned sacrifice for glamorous success.
I thought you had reservations about the gods.
Privately, I believe in none of them, neither do you. Publicly, I believe in them all. Greetings, Marcus Claudius Flavius.
Or maybe we are introduced to Napoleon in Egypt as he inquires about the supply of water, or the current logistical situation, or the disposition of the Mameluke enemy, or news of Nelson's fleet. Or maybe we could get that Dumas scene that I described earlier. What is the first thing the audience hears from Ridley Scott's Napoleon in Egypt?
"Dear Josephine."
And what is the first thing we hear from Napoleon when he invades Russia with 600,000 men, the biggest invasion in world history up to that point?
"My dear Josephine."
And when Napoleon thinks he has vanquished the Russians at Borodino and is marching on to complete his defeat of Russia once and for all, what is the first thing we hear from him?
"My dear Josephine."
"I am no longer able even to can. This is so typical. We can't have great heroes anymore. Every man in cinema today has to be an emotionally incontinent, wimpy.
Dear Josephine.
Stop. Stop talking about fucking Josephine for 5 seconds, man. Okay? I'm in the middle of a rant here. It's not enough that all our fictional heroes have been deconstructed and humiliated before our very eyes, their masculine heroism pathologized by activist hacks determined to crush them into dust beneath the overwhelming power of the progressive steamroller. Now, the great men of history have to be turned into...
My dear Josephine.
Would you shut the fuck up about Josephine?
There's no survival.
Oh, for fuck's sake. He's not gonna stop now. Now he started talking about her, this is gonna be a while, isn't it?
If you love me, you write me twice a day. Tell me there are no snakes in your bed.
These iconoclastic Hollywood red guards want to create a cultural environment in which characters are portrayed as representatives of an identity group and nothing else. Which is why you won't see people like Thomas Alexandre Dumas properly depicted, because as much as they want diversity on screen, he's the wrong kind of diversity. A heroic, aggressive, masculine conqueror who...
Reflection of myself.
Oh, Mr. Reflection. Well, I suppose there is some crossover in terms of racial characteristics, but I don't think, given your progressive viewpoints, that you would be interested in associating yourself with Dumas, Mr. Reflection. Bear in mind, Dumas was a French conqueror. In fact, he played a major part in crushing the Cairo revolt, personally riding into the Grand Mosque on horseback and slaughtering many...
Reflection of myself.
Well, Dumas was a mixed-race Creole, so technically speaking, from a racial perspective, he's no more a reflection of you than he is of me, given his European...
Reflection of myself.
Racial identity is not a binary, Mr. Reflection. There are considerable...
Reflection of myself. It matters.
Of course it does. I apologize. You are fully reflected in Napoleonic history, Mr. Reflection. Well done.
For marginalized people, a lot of energy is devoted to justifying.
Yes, thank you for your contribution, Mr. Reflection. Now...
Reflection myself.
Apart from the swampy, murky presentation of the battles designed to hide the crappy CGI, the worst thing about them is the total lack of tactical detail. I wouldn't even call it historically inaccurate. It's just an outright disdain for historical reality. Look at how the French infantry advance at Austerlitz.
At the double!
World War I tactics, men jumping out of trenches and advancing at a run while spread out to avoid being mown down by machine guns. That is not how infantry advanced on the early 19th century battlefield. Men spread out like this would have been shattered by a cavalry attack or even a bayonet charge. This is how a Napoleonic infantry line advanced. Ranks packed close together and marching in lockstep, Sergei Bondarchuk was able to achieve the deific feat of replicating the tactics of the Napoleonic battlefield because he had 15,000 Soviet soldiers at his disposal. Every single soldier you see on screen right now is a real person, which is why it looks truly epic. Let's just admire this for a bit. Incredible. Increasingly, I'm coming to think of modern Hollywood CGI as a failed experiment in cinematic history, a turning point in which studios gave up on the ingenuity of practical effects and the visceral beauty of real people in real places in favor of this.
This was fun! Hi, there's my new favorite clients.
What is it they've sent us?
Boats!
There was a time when CGI was an effective complement to practical effects. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is a perfect example of this. But today, the opposite has become the case. CGI is the go-to for rendering big spectacle on screen, and practical effects are supplementary. Ridley Scott never had more than 500 extras, which is a lot, but he hasn't used them well. He spread them out too much, making the advancing armies look disorganized, unprofessional, and anemic. Compare this to Barry Lyndon, in which Kubrick uses less than 200 extras. Kubrick showcases a small-scale skirmish rather than a massive battle because he knew that he wouldn't have been able to do a large battle justice with the resources at his disposal, but he uses the extras that he does have available to him very well. They look like a period army, not just in appearance, but in tactical behavior. A comparison between Bondarchuk's Waterloo and RSN is absurd. That would be like comparing apples and dog shit. So I'll just put the two together and let you make up your mind about which you think looks better. RSN. Waterloo. At the end of particularly bloody battles, Ridley Scott tries to communicate scale by literally printing the casualty figures on screen. There are a few problems with this. First, it breaks the fourth wall by listing casualties. The movie is narrating itself to the audience, which would be fine if this were a narrative tale told from the third person, as for example Barry Lyndon is, but it isn't. RSN is nominally a historical drama presented from the first person. The movie projecting numbers onto the screen for the benefit of the audience breaks immersion. There is a very easy fix to this. Just have an officer list the casualty figures to Napoleon. Again, we see a missed opportunity for characterization here. Napoleon's reaction to hearing massive casualty figures would be an insight into the man, but no, just words printed on a screen. The second problem is that Ridley Scott is breaking the show don't tell principle. Instead of showing the aftermath of the battle, we get words on a screen telling us how many men died. Far too abstract. It has absolutely no emotional impact whatsoever. Film is not a text-based art form, it is audio-visual. Present the images and sounds of the aftermath of slaughter. Resorting to text to tell the audience how big the battle was is lazy and pointless. Another problem is that I'm not sure what Ridley Scott is trying to achieve by listing these casualty figures. Is he trying to communicate scale? Or is he suggesting Napoleon was a butcher because he had high casualty figures? If he wanted to communicate scale, Sir Ridley should have created epic, impressive battlefields that communicated the massive size of the Napoleonic battle, as Bondarchuk does in Waterloo, instead of the puny, swampy shite that occasionally interrupts the story of Josephine in RSN. Scott's intention does seem to be the depiction of Napoleon as a butcher. The text doesn't appear at the Battle of the Pyramids, where the French suffered less than 300 casualties, because that would have made Napoleon look good. It only shows up when casualties are high, suggesting that this is a butcher's bill. But the argument that Napoleon is an amoral butcher because he had high casualties in some of his battles could be applied to any military leader in history. Grant suffered 55,000 casualties attacking Lee's army during the Overland campaign. Should we despise Grant as a butcher for this? The Americans suffered 26,000 casualties at Iwo Jima. Does this make Nimitz a butcher? The Russians suffered 1 million combat casualties during the Battle of Stalingrad. Does this make their defense of the city immoral? Napoleon was a general at a time in history when massive armies had become the norm. The result was massive casualties. When he could, Napoleon won with as few casualties as possible, such as when he surrounded and captured an Austrian army of over 30,000 men at Ulm, suffering only 1,500 casualties in the process. Printing casualty figures on screen is lazy, distracting, pointless, illogical, and inane. One day, the great Napoleonic epic will be put to screen. This is not it. Steven Spielberg is presently working on an adaptation of Stanley Kubrick's unrealized Napoleonic epic, which will be a 7-part limited series for HBO.
We're mounting a large production for HBO based on Stanley's original script, Napoleon. So we are working on Napoleon as a 7-part limited series.
Spielberg's excellent 2001 movie, AI, Artificial Intelligence, had originally been a Kubrick production and was heavily based on Kubrick's script treatment and storyboards. Let us put the abomination that was Ridley Scott's Napoleon behind us and hope that the Spielberg production, assuming it sees the light of day, will do justice to Napoleon Bonaparte. I will finish this video with a quote from the great Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington. He was once asked who was the greatest general of his age. Wellesley replied, "In this age, in past ages, in any age, Napoleon." Everything prior to this point in the video is a remaster of a video I posted in November 2023. That video was up for over a year and never had any copyright problems. But by an astonishing coincidence, it was hit by a sudden, massive copyright claim and subsequently blocked the day after I posted a negative review of Ridley Scott's follow-up to RSN, Gladiator 2. Now, I of course cannot prove that Scott Free Productions was behind this assault on my Imperium, but as a despot, it has always been my philosophy that it is better to launch an unjust war and ask for forgiveness following your bloody conquest of an innocent nation than to first seek justification for war, and in doing so, risk peace. For that reason, I, the despot, declare war on Scott Free Productions and here initiate my counterattack against the enemy. My review of RSN, the Director's Cut. Ridley Scott makes around 30 additions in his Director's Cut, which add up to 48 minutes of additional runtime. Of the 30 or so additions, 5 are good. These 5 are as follows: Josephine's imprisonment during the Terror, the execution of some nuns at the guillotine, Napoleon having a bit of lad banter with one of the boys before the Brumaire coup, the removal of the ridiculous World War I sniper from the Battle of Waterloo, and by far the best addition to the Director's Cut, a shot of Joaquin Phoenix's ass. Josephine's imprisonment communicates the desperate and grim conditions many Frenchmen and women experienced when they were imprisoned during the Terror. She attempts to get pregnant because the execution of a pregnant woman was delayed until the birth of her child. How humane. A major problem with the theatrical cut of RSN is that Josephine just shows up after the Terror, and the script contents itself with telling us what she's been through.
When I was in prison, I was told the only way to survive was to get pregnant.
The Director's Cut actually shows us Josephine's ordeal during the Terror, which makes her a more sympathetic figure and explains why it is so important for her to attach herself to a powerful man. If the winds of change shift against her again in the volcanic political atmosphere of revolutionary France, she must have a strong man who can protect her and her children. I also enjoyed Josephine's friend giving her a tour of the shithole she's been dumped in.
A pregnant woman gets a stay of execution until the baby's born. And men never need reason to fuck, do they?
The execution of the nuns is a good scene as it depicts just how fanatically extreme the political conditions of the Terror became and acts as a catalyst for the downfall of Robespierre within the narrative of the movie. The night before the Brumaire coup, Napoleon has a laugh with some guy. I've watched RSN 3 times now and I have no idea who this guy is, but it's a good scene. Napoleon jokes around with some guy. It's the only scene in this 3.5-hour film in which Joaquin Phoenix doesn't look bored, angry, horny, or sad. Even at the height of the Battle of Austerlitz, he looks bored out of his mind. By the way, earlier in this video, I asserted that Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor. That was before Joker 2. I no longer believe Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor. And that's it. Of the 30 or so additions to the theatrical cut, those are the only good ones, and the rest of the additions range in quality from pointless to absolutely dreadful. The director's cut briefly touches on the Italian campaign. It opens with a clunky voiceover narration disguised as a letter to Josephine.
I've already conquered Italy, who surrendered without conflict.
Scott uses this clumsy narrative device throughout the movie to tell the audience where Napoleon is and what he's doing. Napoleon obviously never wrote plot exposition in his letters to Josephine because she read about his campaigns in the papers and was well informed of what was going on by the wives and mistresses of soldiers on campaign. Also, the voiceover for the Italian campaign is a complete fiction.
I've already conquered Italy, who surrendered without conflict.
Italy didn't surrender without a fight. This isn't World War II, when Italy surrendered because some American GIs looked in their general direction from across the Mediterranean. Napoleon fought and won 9 battles in a row in the campaign of Italy, and there was no political entity known as Italy. In 1796, there were a dozen political entities in what is today Italy, but Ridley Scott decided that, for the sake of narrative convenience, Italy was already a united political entity 80 years before its actual unification. And Napoleon's Italian campaign never happened. The Sardinians, Austrians, Papal States, and Venice all saw a small French army led by a young general no one had ever heard of approaching Italy, and decided that, yeah, fuck it, alright, we surrender. During Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, Ridley Scott treats us to a scene featuring Josephine sitting down. Who needs the siege of Jaffa when we can have a long, lingering shot of Josephine sitting in a chair? After Napoleon is publicly cucked by Josephine, he begs for comfort from Josephine's lady-in-waiting.
My wife has humiliated me, and I need comfort, Lucille.
Yes, I'm sure that you do, General.
That scene is about as subtle as Zoe Saldana's Oscar speech.
I am the first American.
Napoleon begging for comfort from a Creole serving wench. Perhaps the despot should follow Ridley Scott's example of indulging in shameless character assassination in my upcoming biopic of Keir Starmer.
Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague, and we are the cure.
And just in case you didn't quite get the message that simpering, whimpering Bonnie was a wee dweeb, Scott treats us to this exchange.
You are just a brute that is nothing without me.
I am just a brute that is nothing without you.
Yes.
You motherfuckers will be playing basketball in Pelican Bay when I get finished with you. Shoe program, nigga!
There's a domestic montage of Napoleon as first consul, which is an inoffensive period drama slop churn. It's a rare moment when the movie allows the narrative to rest in the present, instead of hurtling on toward the next highlight of Napoleon's Wikipedia page. That said, it is a montage, and after Arcane Season 2 defecated into that well, I'm beginning to suspect that the montage is a has-been trope that is best left in the past. The next edition is the Battle of Marengo, all 27 seconds of it. So there are a few historical inaccuracies here. Firstly, the Battle of Marengo didn't last 27 seconds, it lasted 12 hours. Second, Napoleon did not charge the Austrians on horseback while wielding a Hex-Tech hammer. Third, the cavalry charge itself is wrong. There is far too much space between the cavalrymen. War horses in a Napoleonic cavalry charge were packed close together so as to create a massive amount of force that could break an infantry line and to terrify enemy soldiers. Inexperienced infantry often broke in the face of a cavalry charge, as often happened in Spain when the French were putting down peasant rebellions during the Peninsular War. The cavalry at RSN Marengo are spread out like horse scraped over too much field. The plot of Rue Saint-Nicaise is included. This most famous assassination attempt against Napoleon is another bizarre example of Sir Ridley replacing real history for his idea of much more cinematic history. As with all other such substitutions in RSN, the Scott version of history is dramatically inferior to the actual event, but easier to film. The Rue Saint-Nicaise plot is the worst instance of Scott rewriting history for the narrative convenience of his movie. So there is a lot wrong with Scott's depiction of the Rue Saint-Nicaise assassination attempt. So much, in fact, that it's easier to relate the real event rather than to do a back and forth comparison. In the actual event, Napoleon, Josephine, and some friends and relatives were heading out to see the premiere of Joseph Haydn's The Creation, a fine piece. Napoleon left ahead of Josephine, and she followed in a separate carriage with her daughter and Napoleon's sister. On the route Napoleon would take to the opera, the conspirators had set up a horse and cart upon which they had attached a large wine cask filled with gunpowder and shrapnel. They ran a fuse from the device, and when Napoleon's carriage came into view, one of the conspirators signaled another conspirator who lit the fuse and fled. Fortunately, Napoleon's carriage driver was so drunk that he was driving hell for leather, and the carriage passed the device well before the lit fuse hit the gunpowder. A rare example of a DUI actually saving lives. The device exploded as Josephine's carriage was approaching it. Josephine's daughter was slightly injured. Josephine's carriage may well have been entirely engulfed had their departure not been delayed by her laboured attempts to put an Egyptian shawl on in the Alexandrian fashion. Women, am I right, boys? 5 bystanders were killed and 26 injured. Among the dead was a 14-year-old girl named Puceul, who one of the coward assassins had paid 12 sous to guard the cart while he set up the fuse. If he had been any sort of man, he would have given the impoverished girl all the money he had on him, told her to run home, then stood atop the machine and plunged a lit torch into the gunpowder as Napoleon's carriage passed by, sacrificing himself for his cause and going down in a magnificent blaze of glory. Instead, he had a peasant girl guard the cart, then, after lighting the fuse, scurried off like the rat that he was, leaving the girl to die in the explosion. Following the failed plot, the Parisian police quickly apprehended the conspirators. The plot was planned and executed by a group of 7 Breton royalists in the pay of the English, though there is no evidence that the English were directly involved in the plot. One of the leaders, Georges Cadoudal, fled to his English paymasters after his successful murder of a French teenage girl. The English smuggled him back into France 3 years later in 1804, where he wandered around conspiratorially for 6 months, drinking and whoring away the money the English had furnished him with in the hope that he would organise another assassination attempt. The idiot was eventually apprehended and guillotined by French authorities. His last words were,
"I'm sorry I'm such a piece of shit."
Another conspirator, a French nobleman named Pierre, fled to the United States after the assassination attempt. Pierre was so racked with guilt at the death of the teenage girl that he became a priest.
"The Lord sent me to save your threadbare soul, harlot. Get in the car and remove your filthy vestments."
Napoleon used the plot as an excuse to rid himself of his remaining Jacobin enemies. 4 were guillotined and 130 were exiled. There's a mission in Assassin's Creed Unity in which you can stop this plot, kill the conspirators, and save the life of Puceul. The plot of Rue Saint-Nicaise is a dramatic and intriguing tale of conspiracy, cowardice, murder, investigation, tracking down the suspects, flight, justice, vengeance, remorse, and political fallout. On its own, it could make a damn good limited series. In RSN, this event is reduced to 4 or 5 morons lighting a carriage full of gunpowder on fire, waiting for Napoleon's carriage to pass by, then ramming his carriage with this burning powder keg. Miraculously, the burning barrels of gunpowder wait until impact with Napoleon's carriage to ignite. Also miraculously, the plotters knew exactly when to set fire to their carriage of gunpowder. Also miraculously, all 5 of them pushed this burning carriage full of gunpowder onto the road despite the obvious danger that it could explode at any moment and kill them all. Also miraculously, not one of Napoleon's advance cavalry guard thought to investigate a burning carriage full of suspicious-looking barrels surrounded by suspicious-looking men on the first consul's route to the opera. Also miraculously, Napoleon is entirely uninjured, despite the burning carriage full of gunpowder exploding next to his carriage. Also miraculously, the VFX department weren't guillotined for CGI that looks like this. Ridley Scott took a deeply interesting historical event and turned it into a plot hole-ridden mess that makes 0 sense. I now draw your attention to an extract from the memoirs of General Jean Rapp, who was with Napoleon's party that night. The following extract details Rapp arriving at Napoleon's opera box immediately after the assassination attempt.
"I alighted and crossed the Rue Nicaise, which was strewed with the bodies of those who had been thrown down, and the fragments of the walls that had been shattered by the explosion. Neither the consul nor any individual of his suite sustained any serious injury. When I entered the theater, Napoleon was seated in his box, calm and composed, and looking at the audience through his opera glass. Fouché was beside him. "Josephine," said he, as soon as he observed me. She entered at that moment, and he did not finish his question. "The rascals," said he very coolly, "wanted to blow me up. Bring me a book of the oratorio."
Rapp's account of Napoleon's reaction to the event, that he was cool-headed and stoic, is somewhat contrasted by Ridley Scott's depiction of Napoleon's reaction.
"I want this man seized, and I want him brought swiftly to justice." He's a filthy, verboten weasel who will be punished for his part in this plot against me.
In RSN, Napoleon stomps around like a paranoid maniac and blames the Duke of Enghien, who was the last Prince of Bourbon. Napoleon orders the Duke executed then and there, so some French troops go to Belgium and shoot him on the orders of Dumas, despite the fact that Dumas was at home in northern France dying of cancer at the time. In reality, the Duke was kidnapped from Belgium on Napoleon's orders, then given a brief show trial by military tribunal, then executed. This occurred 3 years after the plot of Rue Saint-Nicaise. The Duke was executed for reasons entirely unrelated to the assassination plot. Ridley Scott has distorted 2 historical events and combined them for dramatic and narrative convenience. Ironically, the result is a sequence devoid of drama, which serves only to muddle the narrative. The viewer has absolutely no idea who the Duke of Enghien is because he has never been mentioned in the movie before. So when some French troops shoot a random aristocrat in a forest, it has zero dramatic impact, and the assassination attempt has no setup or context. It's a jarring insert that comes faster than Napoleon in a hurry. There's a bizarre scene shortly after this in which Napoleon asks the man who cucked him, Hippolyte Charles, how best to pleasure Josephine.
If I want to have a son, do you think I should spend time with my mouth down between my wife's legs?
Scott seems to be depicting Napoleon as a man entirely devoid of sexual passion here, which is an unjust slander. In one of the many letters Napoleon wrote to Josephine, he included the instruction, "Home in 3 days, don't wash." An instruction that the despot approves of, for what man has not dreamed of reveling in the putrid reek of an unwashed lover? I'm alright, boys! After this bizarre exchange, we are 1 hour and 40 minutes into RSN, the director's cut, and in 1 hour and 40 minutes of screen time, there has been 6 minutes of battle action. By the time Napoleon became first consul, he had fought 39 battles with a record of 36 wins and 3 defeats. Sir Ridley briefly glanced at a list of these 39 battles, thought, yeah, 6 minutes ought to cover it, then returned to berating his cinematographer for not setting up the dolly cameras fast enough for the scene of Josephine sitting in a chair. RSN dedicates more time to Josephine sitting in a chair than it does to the Battle of Marengo, a decisive French victory that, coupled with Moreau's triumph at Hohenlinden, brought French victory in the War of the Second Coalition. Marengo was also a vital boost to Napoleon's political legitimacy as first consul. There is an additional scene showing the French army's flight from Russia, but in yet another baffling Ridley Scott insert, instead of an engaging depiction of a historical event, for example the French retreat across the Berezina River in horrendous winter conditions and under attack from the Russians, Scott inserts his own fictional incident in which French soldiers accidentally burn themselves to death inside a barn because no one in this squad, made up almost entirely of farmers conscripted into the army, considered the possibility that building fires in a locked barn full of dry hay might be a bad idea. There is a particularly boring sequence of Napoleon on Elba, which includes one scene in which Napoleon cries to his mommy about being a simp.
My wife is entertaining the Russian Emperor.
The main problems with the theatrical cut of RSN are historical distortion, the greatest hits format, jarring time jumps, too much Josephine, not enough battle scenes, battles that are far too short, garbage tier battle action, almost no political context, Joaquin Phoenix's awful performance, mischaracterization of Napoleon, and bad CGI. Depending on what Ridley Scott filmed, a good editor would be able to ameliorate at least some of these problems. For example, if more battle scenes and political machinations were added, this would provide much needed action and geopolitical context. In every one of RSN's main problem areas, the director's cut makes the movie worse. Additional historical distortions are added. The addition of a get up for a piss and you'll miss it Italian campaign makes the time jumps even more jarring. Napoleon is in France, now he's in Italy, now he's in Egypt. When? How? Why? This will have a bewildering effect on the vast majority of the audience who are not knowledgeable about the Napoleonic Wars. The biggest addition to the director's cut is Josephine, because there wasn't enough of her in the theatrical release. More backstory, more lovers, more simping, more sitting in chairs and staring into nothing. Absurdly, in the 48 minutes of additional screen time of a director's cut of the life of Napoleon, only 27 seconds of battle are added. If you were in any doubt that Sir Ridley Scott is no longer capable of making good films, let this be the fact that finally convinces you. After RSN's release, the biggest criticism was the dearth of battle action. Scott solved this issue by adding a 27-second cavalry charge led by Napoleon, despite the fact that Napoleon did not and could not fight on horseback. There are a few half-assed attempts in the RSN director's cut to add some political context, but these scenes are a jumble of names and events that have never been mentioned before.
As governor of the Council of 500, you will persuade both councils at an emergency session that a Jacobin coup is at hand.
The result is that the viewers will simply be confused by these scenes. No attempt has been made to improve the awful CGI. In fact, the worst piece of CGI in RSN is in the director's cut, and Scott remains steadfast in his determination to character assassinate Napoleon.
I am just a brute. It is nothing without you.
Yes.
Boats!
The director's cut of RSN is a much worse movie because it makes an already terrible viewing experience far longer, magnifies the movie's existing problems, and turns a boring period drama with little war action into an even more boring period drama with almost no war action. Vive l'empereur, Ridley Scott needs to stop making movies. The Despot will finish this video by thanking my channel members who have loyally assembled for the attack on Scott Free Productions. Following my declaration of war against Scott Free Productions, almost the entire staff of the studio immediately threw down their arms and begged to be allowed to join the Despot. I benevolently agreed to liberate this wretched mob from the tyranny of working on Ridley Scott Productions. My loyal channel members have flocked to the Despot's banner and now ride with me to officially accept the surrender of Scott Free Productions.